This is HOA catastrophe. It started with a fence line and ended with a board meltdown. You are not allowed to rewrite the rules. That is what Patricia Johnson screamed at me the moment I stepped out of my truck with the first bundle of fence pickets in my arms. She was already on my driveway, clipboard in one hand, key ring jangling in the other, her pink cardigan flapping in the dusty air. I had not even unloaded the first post, and she was jabbing her finger at a violation notice like I had just committed a felony. I am a mortgage loan officer in Quebec City, and I understand lien consequences better than most people. I know what happens when someone threatens your property record, and I know how fast an HOA can turn a simple project into a legal nightmare. Sequoia Terrace Estates Association has a reputation for being strict, but I had followed every step. I submitted my fence plan 6 weeks ago, got written approval from the management company, and hired a licensed contractor. I thought I was safe. Patricia did not care. She held up a fence-style diagram with no readable text and waved it like proof. "That is not what you submitted," she said. Her voice was sharp enough to cut steel. I stared at the diagram, and it looked identical to mine. Same height, same picket spacing, same setback from the property line. But Patricia shook her head and said the board never approved this style, and if I continued, she would fine me $200 a day starting immediately. I asked her to show me the approval letter. She said she did not have it with her, but she knew what the board voted on, and this was not it. I pulled out my phone and opened the email from the management company. The attachment matched the diagram she was holding. I turned the screen toward her, and she barely glanced at it before saying email approvals do not count unless the board secretary signs off in person. That was not in the rules. I had read the bylaws twice. Architectural review required written submission and management approval. There was no mention of in-person signatures. But Patricia crossed her arms and said if I wanted mercy, move somewhere without an HOA. She loved saying that. I would hear it at least 3 more times before this was over. My contractor Luis pulled up in his truck while Patricia was still ranting. He got out, took one look at her, and asked if there was a problem. Patricia turned on him immediately. She told him if he installed one post without board authorization, she would fine him directly for violating the community covenants. Luis looked at me, and I could see the hesitation in his face. He had dealt with HOA nonsense before, but direct threats against contractors were rare. Most HOAs knew better than to go after vendors. Patricia did not care about better. She said she had already contacted the management office, and they were preparing a stop work order. She would make an example of me so nobody else tried a fence project. Her exact words. She wanted everyone in Sequoia Terrace to know that she was the one who enforced the rules, and nobody got around her. I told Luis to hold off for now. I did not want him caught in the crossfire. Patricia smirked and said that was the smart choice. Then she walked back to her house, keys jangling the whole way. The sound of those keys became a warning signal. Anytime I heard that jingle, I knew she was about to make my day worse. I called the management office as soon as Patricia was gone. The receptionist put me through to the property manager, a woman named Diane who sounded exhausted before I even started talking. I explained the situation, and Diane sighed. She said Patricia had been calling the office every day for the last week, demanding they revoke my approval. Diane told her no, but Patricia kept escalating. She claimed I had submitted fraudulent documents and that the board had never seen my application. Diane pulled my file while I waited. She confirmed that my submission was approved, the board had voted on it, and Patricia was present at that meeting. Diane said she would send me a copy of the meeting minutes and a signed approval letter, but it would take a few days. In the meantime, she suggested I keep all my paperwork organized and avoid direct confrontations with Patricia. Too late for that. Patricia was already planning her next move. That evening, I got an email blast sent to the entire neighborhood. Patricia had written a message framing me as the one resident who refuses community standards. She did not name me directly, but she described my address, my fence project, and my so-called pattern of defiance. She said residents who ignored the rules were a threat to property values and that the board would take swift action to protect the community. The neighborhood group chat exploded. Half the residents were asking what was going on, and the other half were already taking sides. A few people defended me, saying they had seen my approved plans. But Patricia doubled down. She posted photos of my property with red circles drawn around the fence posts I had not even installed yet. She said the setback was wrong, the height was wrong, and the style violated the aesthetic guidelines. I checked the guidelines again. My fence was 3 inches shorter than the maximum allowed height. The setback was exactly 2 feet from the property line, which was the standard requirement. The style was vertical picket, which was explicitly listed as approved in the architectural manual. Patricia was inventing violations that did not exist. But she had the authority to issue fines, and she knew it. Her role as fines and enforcement coordinator gave her the power to write up violations and send them to the management company for processing. Most residents did not fight back because the appeals process was slow, expensive, and stacked against homeowners. Patricia counted on that. She wanted me to fold fast. I was not folding. I had custody arrangements with my ex-wife, and I could not afford to miss visitation time because of HOA hearings and delays. My daughter spent every other weekend with me, and if this dragged into court, I would lose those hours sitting in legal limbo. That was my line. Patricia could throw every fine she wanted at me, but I was not letting her take time away from my kid. If you are enjoying this chaos, hit that like button and subscribe for more HOA horror stories that prove the rules are made up and the fines do not matter until you fight back. The next morning, I found a second notice taped to my front door. This one said I had 24 hours to submit a revised application, pay a $500 expedited review fee, and halt all construction until the board met again. The next board meeting was 3 weeks away. Patricia knew that timeline would kill my project. Luis had already blocked out 2 weeks for my job, and if I delayed, he would have to move on to the next client. I would lose my contractor, my approval window, and any chance of finishing before winter. I called Diane again. She said Patricia had no authority to demand expedited review fees. That fee structure did not exist in the bylaws. Diane told me to ignore the notice and proceed with the original approval. But she also warned me that Patricia might escalate to the board president, and if that happened, the situation could get messier. Patricia did not go to the board president. She went straight to retaliatory records denial. I had requested copies of the original board meeting minutes to prove my approval was legitimate, and Patricia blocked the request. She said I had to pay $30 in copy fees and wait 30 days for processing. Under Quebec HOA law, records requests are supposed to be fulfilled within 10 business days, and copy fees are capped at reasonable costs. $30 for 3 pages was absurd, and 30 days was a deliberate stall tactic. I filed a formal complaint with the management company. Diane escalated it to the regional supervisor, a man named Greg, who handled disputes for multiple HOA communities. Greg called me the same day. He said Patricia had a history of using records denial to intimidate residents, and he was already tired of dealing with her complaints. He told me he would override her block and send the minutes directly. He also said he would include a memo clarifying that expedited review fees were not valid. Patricia did not take that well. She called me that evening and said, "Go ahead and call whoever you want. I have a committee for that." She was furious. She said Greg had no authority to interfere with board enforcement, and she would make sure the next hearing addressed his overreach. I said almost nothing, because silence makes people talk. Patricia kept ranting, and I let her dig her own hole. 2 days later, Luis came back to start the installation. We were laying out the post positions when Patricia appeared again. She had a tiny line level in her hand, waving it like proof. She said the string line I had pulled between the corner stakes was not level, and that meant the fence would be crooked. Luis checked the line with his own level. It was perfectly straight. Patricia insisted it was off by a 1/4 inch, and that 1/4 inch would violate the aesthetic standards. Luis ignored her. He started digging the first post hole with a gas-powered auger. The noise was loud enough to drown out conversation, but Patricia did not leave. She stood 10 feet away, filming us on her phone. I asked her what she was doing, and she said she was documenting the violation for the board. I told her the board already approved the project, and she said the board did not approve fraudulent setbacks. That was when I realized Patricia was not just enforcing rules. She was trying to create a violation where none existed. If she could provoke me into making a mistake, or if she could manufacture evidence that my measurements were wrong, she could justify a fine and force me into an appeals hearing. The hearing would delay the project, cost me money, and give her another chance to block me. I was not giving her that chance. I had already contacted a local paralegal friend named Marcus who specialized in HOA disputes. Marcus had helped me organize an evidence packet that included the original approval letter, the board meeting minutes, photos of the string line and measurements, and witness statements from 2 neighbors who confirmed the fence location was correct. Marcus told me to keep building, keep documenting, and wait for Patricia to overplay her hand. She did not take long. The surveyor I had hired to confirm the property line was delayed by a week, and Patricia tried to rush a hearing before the line was confirmed. She filed a formal complaint with the board, claiming I had encroached on the HOA common area and that my fence posts were 6 inches over the line. She demanded an emergency hearing to stop construction. Diane called me and said the board president had agreed to the hearing, but it would not happen for another 10 days. That gave me just enough time to get the surveyor out. I paid extra for a rush job, and the surveyor came out 3 days later. He spent 2 hours measuring, checking county records, and placing stakes. When he finished, he handed me a written report that confirmed my fence was 2 feet inside my property line. Patricia had been wrong the entire time. I made copies of the report and sent one to Diane, one to Greg, and one to the board president. I also sent a copy to Patricia directly, with a note saying I expected a retraction of her complaint. Patricia did not retract anything. Instead, she escalated again. She called a tow truck and told the driver that Luis had parked illegally on HOA common property. The tow truck driver pulled up, looked at the truck, and hesitated. Luis had parked on my driveway, not on common property. The driver asked Patricia to show him the property line, and she pointed at a spot that was clearly inside my lot. The driver refused to tow. He said he was not getting involved in a property dispute without proof. Patricia argued with him for 10 minutes, but he left without hooking up the truck. Luis and I watched the whole thing from the porch. Luis shook his head and said he had never seen an HOA enforcer try to weaponize a tow truck before. I told him Patricia was just getting started. That afternoon, the management office closed early for a staff meeting. I had exactly 1 hour to deliver my dispute packet in person before they locked the doors. I drove across town with the evidence folder on the passenger seat, hoping Diane would still be there. She was. She took the folder, flipped through it, and said this was the most organized dispute packet she had seen all year. She told me Greg would review it before the hearing, and she expected the board to dismiss Patricia's complaint. But Patricia was not done. The night before the hearing, she posted another neighborhood email. This time, she claimed I had bribed the surveyor to falsify the property line. She said she had contacted the county assessor and filed a formal request to resurvey the entire block. The email was unhinged. She accused me of fraud, conspiracy, and intentional property damage. She said I was destroying the community and that the board needed to take immediate legal action. The neighborhood chat turned into a war zone. Residents were arguing about property lines, survey accuracy, and whether Patricia had lost her mind. A few people pointed out that Patricia had no evidence for her bribery claim, and that accusing a licensed surveyor of fraud was a serious legal risk. Patricia doubled down. She said she had documentation, and she would present it at the hearing. I knew she did not have documentation. I also knew she was counting on intimidation to make me back down. But I had a trump card, and I was not revealing it until the right moment. I had something Patricia did not know about, and when I played it, her entire case would collapse. The hearing was scheduled at a local contractor yard, where the HOA rented a small meeting room. It was a neutral location, and the board president wanted to keep it informal. I arrived early with Marcus. Patricia was already there, clipboard in hand, keyring jangling. She gave me a smug look and said, "If you want mercy, move somewhere without an HOA." Third time. The board president, a man named Robert, opened the hearing by reading Patricia's complaint. She claimed I had violated setback rules, ignored stop work orders, and bribed the surveyor. Robert asked me to respond. I handed him the evidence packet and walked him through every document. The approval letter, the meeting minutes, the survey report, and the witness statements. Robert read through it all, and his expression shifted from neutral to annoyed. He asked Patricia if she had any evidence to support her claims. Patricia pulled out her phone and said she had photos of the fence encroachment. She showed Robert a picture of my fence post next to the property line. Robert asked her where the line was. Patricia pointed at a spot in the photo, but there was no marker, no stake, and no reference point. Robert asked if she had a survey. She said she did not need one, because she had lived in the neighborhood for 15 years and knew where the line was. Robert put the phone down and said personal knowledge is not a legal property boundary. He asked Patricia if she had contacted the county assessor. She said she had filed a request, but it had not been processed yet. Robert asked why she filed the complaint before confirming the line. Patricia did not have an answer. That was when I played the trump card. I pulled out a second folder and handed it to Robert. Inside was a gate vendor service report that proved Patricia had intentionally configured the neighborhood access gate to lock me out during peak construction hours. The report showed that Patricia had called the gate company 3 times in 1 week, requesting that my access code be deactivated. The vendor had documented every call, and the timestamps matched the days Luis and I were blocked from entering the community. Robert read the report in silence. Then he looked at Patricia and asked if she had called the gate company. Patricia hesitated. She said she had called to report a malfunction, but the vendor must have misunderstood. Robert asked why she reported a malfunction 3 times in 1 week. Patricia said it was a persistent issue. I handed Robert a second copy of the report, this one with highlighted sections showing that Patricia had explicitly requested my code be removed. The vendor had refused after the second call because it violated the management company's access policy. Patricia had tried a 3rd time and been denied again. Robert asked Patricia if she had authorization from the board to remove my access. She did not. Robert closed the folder and said the hearing was over. He ruled Patricia's complaint unfounded, and the evidence showed she had acted without board approval and targeted me personally. He said the board would issue a memo clarifying the rule Patricia weaponized, and the management company would send me a fine waiver in writing with a firm no-contact directive. Patricia tried to argue, but Robert cut her off. He said the decision was final, and if she continued to interfere with my project, the board would consider removing her from the enforcement role. Patricia stormed out of the meeting, keys jangling the entire way. Marcus and I stayed behind to sign the formal resolution. Robert apologized for Patricia's behavior and said the board had been dealing with her overreach for months. He told me the gate vendor report was the final straw, and the board would be voting on her removal at the next meeting. 2 weeks later, the board voted unanimously to remove Patricia from the enforcement role. A recorded meeting clip where Patricia had screamed at another resident about a mailbox violation went viral in the neighborhood chat, and residents who had been too scared to complain before started sharing their own stories. Patricia tried to defend herself, but the evidence was overwhelming. She resigned from the board before the removal vote was finalized. Luis finished the fence a week after that. It was exactly to spec, exactly on the property line, and exactly what the board had approved 6 weeks earlier. The neighbor who had originally fact-checked Patricia during one of her rants stopped by to congratulate me. She said she had been waiting years for someone to stand up to Patricia, and she was glad I had the guts to do it. I never saw Patricia again after the hearing. Her house went up for sale 2 months later, and she moved out of Sequoia Terrace before the end of the year. The new enforcement coordinator was a retired accountant who actually read the bylaws before issuing violations, and the neighborhood settled into a quieter rhythm. The whole experience taught me that HOAs count on homeowners giving up. They count on you being too tired, too busy, or too scared to fight back. Patricia thought she could bully me into abandoning the project, and when that did not work, she tried to manufacture violations and weaponize the system against me. But the system only works if you let them get away with it. The moment you document everything, organize your evidence, and force them to follow their own rules, they fold. The board issued a memo clarifying the fence height and setback rules, and the management company updated the architectural review process to require written documentation for all approvals. Patricia's complaint was officially ruled unfounded with evidence cited, and I got my fine waiver in writing with a firm no-contact directive. The surveyor report became part of the permanent record, and the gate vendor incident went into Patricia's file as proof of retaliation. I finished staining the fence the following weekend. I used a small can of wood stain with the label turned away, and I took my time. Every stroke felt like a victory lap. My daughter came over that Sunday, and we sat on the back porch looking at the new fence. She asked why it took so long, and I told her sometimes people try to make simple things complicated, but if you stand your ground, you win. Keep your paper trail close, and I will see you next time.